With common sense for the Commonwealth, it's the John Fredericks Morning Show. Like us on Facebook. Follow John on the new Twitter handle @JF Radio Show. And online, the website, thejohnfredericksshow.com. Listen online anywhere, anytime at washingtontimes.com/listen. And make a note of the new call-in number, toll-free at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646.
Cardinal Dolan says marriage is intended only for a man and a woman, and the church must do more to ensure that its defense of marriage is not reduced to an attack on gay people.
And I admit we haven't been too good at that.
But he also says the church must think of eternal concerns.
Sometimes, by nature, the church has got to be out of touch.
I think any bill that does not include a universal background check is a mistake. It's the most common sense thing that we can do to prevent criminals and the mentally ill from having access to weapons.
Each of us has to look at the language and approve it, but I don't think on the business labor side there's any disagreement. But as Senator Rubio correctly says, we have said we will not come to final agreement till we look at all of the legislative language. We've all agreed that we're not going to come to a final agreement until we see draft legislative language, and we agree on that. We've drafted some of it already. The rest of it will be drafted this week.
It's going to be different this year, especially because nobody really expected anything out of us last year, and now everybody's going to prepare a little bit more for us, and we just got to pick each other up and roll with the punches and manage the highs and lows.
I like our chances, and there's nothing better than being in the pennant race. It fires me up, and I don't mind being the defending National League East champs. I like that, and I like the fact that everybody knows we've got a good ball club here.
Now, with common sense for the Commonwealth, here's John Fredericks.
And on this Monday, April the 1st, John is on his spring break. I'm Steve Ray, the executive producer and director of editorial content, which makes for one very long business card. And along with me this morning, an equally long business card and resume, the political editor of BearingDrift.com, Sean Kenny, is with us as guest host today and tomorrow. Happy opening day, Sean. Baseball is in the air.
Thank God.
Yeah, no kidding. Those last two clips from Strasburg and Davey Johnson just made my day. And for those of you who don't believe that today is opening day, well, just think of it this way. That girls' softball game that was played between the Houston Astros and Texas last night, I don't think really counts. You got to have opening day in the nation's capital, or at the very least, as it happened for years and years and years when D.C. didn't have a place for the president to throw out the first pitch, it happened in Cincinnati because the Reds were the longest standing team in the majors. So
is that right?
That's why. Okay. Exactly. So I've given you an excuse to essentially get off work sometime around noon if you're in Northern Virginia or the D.C. area. Head on over to Nats Park and see what these new Nationals are all about.
If you love America,
yes,
you will go to Nationals Park today.
Baseball, and hot dogs, apple pie, and
freedom and America.
Exactly. The hell with Chevrolet. So Sean Kenny is here, as I said. John is on his spring break. It is Sean's birthday as well. So if you want to head to our Facebook page at John Fredericks, the John Fredericks Show there, and wish Sean a happy birthday along the lines of that wonderful blend of Scorpio and Scarface. That picture. The picture I found of you in shades with a 3-day growth of beard coming out of Witsec, apparently. That was the best picture I could find of you, Sean.
It covers up most of the face. So when you have a face made for radio and a voice made for print, this works. So,
yeah, but you know what makes up the difference? You've got the expertise that very few have when it comes to not only Virginia politics, but national politics. So it's an absolute pleasure, and I've said this before when you've been on via telephone, a great pleasure to have you here in studio, man.
Well, likewise, great honor to be here. Glad to be filling in for John today.
Absolutely. And we're going to get to the meat of the matter right off the bat. We're going to start a little feature today called Campaign Trail. And this audio has been provided by our good friend Anne-Marie Morgan from the Virginia Capital News Network, who is going to provide us with audio from different candidates around the Commonwealth as we move through the election season. And we're going to give you just a little taste of what Terry McAuliffe is all about. Last week, he filed all of his petitions to become an official candidate for governor of the great Commonwealth of Virginia.
Democrats, Independents, Republicans signed our petitions. It's a strong show of support with over 35,000. And I want to thank the over 500 volunteers who have been working really since February 1st to collect these signatures. We're very excited. I want to thank the folks who are with me here today and all the work that they have done to help me do this. And it's an exciting time for us. The petitions are now in, and now we're off.
All right. Then Mr. McAuliffe took questions from the press.
Quinnipiac poll came out today showing obviously a pretty cllose race, but it also showed how both of you guys are not fully known by the electorate. Yeah. Are you worried that that gives a chance for your opponent to kind of define you?
Oh, I think by the time it's September and October, and clearly by the time we get to Election Day, people will know the both of us, and they'll know that what I'm focused on is economic development, job creation, that I'm not going to focus on a social ideological agenda that's going to divide folks. I'm going to focus on bringing people together, working in a bipartisan way, mainstream ideas, and growing our economy. We have a lot of challenges now with sequestration and the Department of Defense cuts. We need a governor who can bring that business experience, working with both sides of the aisle, to move the Commonwealth forward.
And then he answered a specific question about Medicaid expansion.
Mr. McAuliffe, where are you on the Medicaid expansion provision in the budget bill?
I have consistently said that we need to have the Medicaid expansion here in Virginia. First and foremost, it would cover 400,000 to 500,000 Virginians would get access to quality health care next year. It's important socially, morally, it's the right thing to do, but also from a business sense, it's the important thing to do. The hospitals next year would have non-reimbursable costs that presently they don't have. And as the Richmond Times-Dispatch wrote recently, we would receive $21 billion over the next 7 years would flow through the Virginia economy. Our doctors, our nurses, our home health care providers, that is federal taxpayer money that we paid in that we're going to get back. And as you know, the federal government will pay 100% for the first 3 years and then 90% every year after. I want Virginians' money to come back to Virginia. This is our money, and I want our folks to have that care.
All right, and now, like unleashing the rabbit at a greyhound race, I will unleash on you the political expertise of Sean Kenny from BearingDrift.com. Your analysis, good doctor.
Listen very carefully to what Terry McAuliffe just said. He's going to raise your taxes $2.1 billion in the next 3 years. Here's what happens when you sign on for federal mandates. Sure, it's great up front. They're going to do 100% up front now for the first 3 years. At least that's what a federal government, that's $1.5 trillion in the hole every year from now until Kingdom Come is telling us right now. Then they're going to back away to 90% funding. And that's a $2.1 billion tax increase on working class Virginians. Those are people that can't afford it. Those are working families. Those are fixed income seniors. It's anyone in a pension. That's who gets hurt the most with Terry McAuliffe's tax scheme here. Then you go ahead and you back it in. What happens when the federal government walks back even further? If you saw all the tax brouhaha over the Governor McDonald's transportation tax hike, which you're looking at $880 million. Could you imagine something on the order of 2.5 to possibly 3 times that cost going in there? Because we don't know exactly what the Medicaid expansion is going to really involve right now. Right now it's 2.1. 3 years from now it could be much, much more than that. That's what Terry McAuliffe is running on. That's what he signed up to already. And if that's what he intends to take into the teeth of already cash-strapped Virginians, I'm going to love this cakewalk we're going to have from April until November when Ken Cuccinelli takes it back to the Commonwealth of Virginia and the voters and says, you know what, this isn't a vision we can support. It's not a vision that we can afford, and it's certainly something that's way outside of the mainstream. When you're talking about raising taxes, $2.1 billion, that money does not come freely. And if he's talking about job creation, he doesn't have a record of that in Virginia. He's got a great record of that in places like Tennessee. But he doesn't do it in Virginia, and he certainly doesn't do it here. There's no amount of job creation that's going to make up for that kind of gap. Certainly not anything in the private sector. If he's got some sort of magic public sector solution, go get it. But $2.1 billion in tax increases, that's Terry McAuliffe's opening salvo. I'm going to love having this conversation for the next 5 months.
Common Sense News Time coming up on 7:20 here on the John Frederick Show. John is on his spring break. Steve Ray here, the editorial director and executive producer, along with Sean Kenny, the political editor of BearingDrift.com. Sean, I want to replay the second clip where he was asked about the differences and maybe the name recognition of himself and Mr. Cuccinelli. Here was his answer again. I want you to chew on this for a second.
Oh, I think by the time it's September and October, and clearly by the time we get to Election Day, people will know the both of us, and they'll know that what I'm focused on is economic development, job creation, that I'm not going to focus on a social ideological agenda that's going to divide folks. I'm going to focus on bringing people together, working in a bipartisan way, mainstream ideas, and growing our economy. We have a lot of challenges now with sequestration and the Department of Defense cuts. We need a governor who can bring that business experience, working with both sides of the aisle, to move the Commonwealth forward.
All right. One specific line in here.
That I'm not going to focus on a social ideological agenda that's going to divide folks. I'm going to focus on bringing people together.
All right. This sounds to me like Talking Points 4.0. Was this rehearsed in your mind?
I mean, did he have the sheet of paper in his hand, or has he just been reciting it in front of a mirror for the last 3 months? I mean, the bottom line is this. I mean, even Terry McAuliffe couldn't get the talking point out right. He stumbled over his own words. I mean, was he laughing at the same time as he said it? This is the same way he was laughing about whether or not he had been defined by the electorate of Virginia. Keep in mind, this is a man that ran for governor in 2009 and was rejected by the members of his own party because he was too extreme and too out of touch for working class Virginians. By his own party, rejected in 2009. Now nobody wants to go up against Ken Cuccinelli, so they throw up the best guy that they have, the guy that wants it most, and Terry McAuliffe. And you know what? I think that's a fight that Ken Cuccinelli wants to have. If they want to go ahead and take it out and talk about mainstream values, let's talk about job creation, how a $2.1 billion tax increase is going to absolutely destroy any sort of economic development that we're going to have in Virginia. If we're going to talk about mainstream issues and things that affect the pocketbooks of working class Virginians, let's talk about Terry McAuliffe's solutions and the kind of solutions he championed while he was DNC chairman, the kind of solutions that he championed up in Washington. Let's talk about his Washington connections and the solutions that he's had up there, and let's talk about how those solutions have failed Americans throughout the duration of the Obama administration all the way down to the present day, right here in the way that healthcare costs have increased, in the way that the burden and cost of government has continued to skyrocket. That's a great conversation to have. I love that Terry McAuliffe is going to wander into that briar patch. Let's go have it. Let's go talk about it. And you know what? If he can't even get his own talking points straight, certainly if he can't even lie to himself, he's certainly not be able to sell it to the voters of Virginia. I'm so glad he's wandering into this.
At the Prince William County Republican Party meeting, the convention that was held to vote in all the delegates, one of the speakers pointed up something that at that very spot at Stonewall Jackson High School, years before, apparently Mr. McAuliffe made a misstep where he let loose the idea that perhaps he goes where the DNC tells him to go to try and fill a spot. He said that he was looking forward to stepping up to run for governor of Florida. This was years ago, but it was pointed out in a speech by one of the speakers that morning, and I found that to be very interesting because I have always said, even though Mr. McAuliffe is, I think, maybe a 20-year resident of Northern Virginia, he's still perceived, especially downstate, as a carpetbagger, as an outsider. Is that the paintbrush that Mr. Cuccinelli uses to begin with, or is it even part of the discussion at this point?
I'm not even so sure it's part of the discussion. He's already identified himself as a carpetbagger. I think people know that about Terry McAuliffe at this rate. The question is how does that actually translate into actual policy? If he's willing to wander around, whether it's entertaining the idea of running for governor of Florida, or whether or not it's making jobs in Tennessee, not in Virginia, whether or not he trumpets buying $3 million in municipal bonds, probably one of the most underreported stories in Virginia right now as to how the municipal bond market in Virginia at the local government level is truly there's this mad rush to get local governments to go ahead and take out as much as they can with local boards of supervisors that sitting around just getting pressured into it. Those sort of stories need to be told. Terry McAuliffe's got a real problem when it comes to that sort of, that sort of backroom deal sort of thing. He's got an image out there in Virginia right now where that's who people know who he is, even within his own party. And so how does he overcome that? I'm not so sure that he really does. I mean, you can only build so many jobs and throw around so much cash in Tennessee, where the voters of Virginia just say, you know what, maybe this guy isn't all he's cracked up to be.
Coming up on 7:25 here on the John Frederick Show. When we get back, we'll talk about the the fact that he may have to separate himself from being a Clintonista, especially when he co-signed the home loan for, I think, anywhere between $12 and $10 million for the Clintons when they bought their home in New York to allow Hillary to run. A short 90 seconds away from that, here on The John Frederick Show.
If news media in Washington all sound the same to you, turn to the pages of the Washington Times and get a fresh take on politics, defense, national security, and more. Much more. The Washington Times brings you news and opinion on issues often ignored by the mainstream media. For home delivery, call 202-636-3333 or visit WashingtonTimes.com. The Washington Times and WashingtonTimes.com. Fearless reporting, American values.
Hi, Chris Weaver here with the Chris Weaver Real Estate Team. It's 2013 and home values are on the rise. I'm talking to homeowners who are amazed how much their home's value has increased in just the past few months. Fueled by interest rates that are at a 50-year low, the housing market is once again on fire. In fact, we're averaging over one house sold every day. If you're thinking of selling your home or just curious how much it's gone up in value, we have a new and easy way to find out. Just shoot us a text message, 757-986-0886 with your home's address. We will send you in under 1 hour your home's current value. It's quick, easy, and completely free. Using our innovative home value program, we can pinpoint your home's value in just minutes. So don't delay. Find your home's value today. Send that text message to 757-986-0886. That's 757-986-0886. From the District to Northern Virginia to Richmond to Virginia Beach, we are here for you today. Don't delay. That's 757-986-0886.
7:26 here, Common Sense News Time on the John Frederick Show. Steve Ray sitting in all week for John, along with our guest host, Sean Kenny, the political editor of BearingDrift.com. Now, yesterday, online on Google, instead of celebrating Easter in its top-of-the-page graphic, they had a picture of Cesar Chavez, the socialist union leader, most noted for his work with the United Farm Workers Union in California. Did the Terry McAuliffe campaign pay Google to put that Cesar Chavez socialist logo up on its page as he was fundraising on Easter? He said quite sarcastically, without an ounce of seriousness in his voice.
I'm not saying it's possible. I'm just saying, no. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, Cesar Chavez.
I'm sorry. I really miss the angry old white guy form of Republican radio, so I thought I'd parody it for a minute.
Thanks for bringing it on in.
Yeah. He paid for it. I swear he did. He's a communist. He wasn't born in the U.S. I swear. Okay,
the thing is, Cesar Chavez. I mean, he was a practicing Catholic, and so on Easter Sunday of all days, the one person that probably would have taken most offense to having his picture on Easter, for Google, would probably have been Cesar Chavez himself. That's the irony of it all. As far as all the Democratic fundraising on Easter Sunday, I mean, is there no lower form? I mean, come on, who does that? Who does that?
You've knocked on doors. You've been in the neighborhoods. You've done the fundraising and the campaigning and so forth. If you got a knock on the door or even a robocall in the middle of an Easter Sunday, what would your first reaction be?
Outrage. I mean, look, Jean Marie kicks off her campaign. Jean Marie Devilites Davis is running for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, kicks off her campaign on 9/11. I mean, a predictable response was outrage. I mean, you don't do that sort of thing on public days like that are universally recognized. I mean, on Easter Sunday for Terry McAuliffe to come out there, I mean, a good friend of mine, Terrence Bolden, who's with the Virginia Black Conservative Forum, I mean, he was so upset about it that he literally took the time out of his day to go donate to Cuccinelli in reaction to what Terry McAuliffe did. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of people that were just outraged, and it wasn't just McAuliffe. It was the DCCC, the DLC. I mean, the whole Democratic left wing decided to do that. Completely outrageous, totally uncalled for, and I hope people punish them in the future.
Wow, you couldn't have said it any clearer. I think I will induct you into the angry old white guy club of Republican talk show hosts now.
Yeah, it's
join the club. By the way, the secret meeting is not on Sundays. I promise you
Outstanding.
Coming up on half past the hour here on the John Frederick Show, Steve Ray along with Sean Kenny as guest co-host today. Our window on the weather brought to you by Soft Touch Dental Care. BestinSmile.com. Reach out to them when the sun comes up, please, at 703-319-6990. Improve that beautiful pearly smile of yours with Soft Touch Dental Care. 54 degrees and clear this morning, highs staying in the mid to upper 60s to low 50s midday in Virginia Beach at WHKT. 52 degrees with highs in the upper 60s, clear today for Richmond and Central Virginia at WLEE. 50 even street level degrees, partly sunny, highs only in the low 60s for Lynchburg and Roanoke. Boy, that sounds like good news to me. At WBRG, our newest affiliate, and 48 degrees, highs in the low 60s in the nation's capital on opening day for Nats baseball here at our flagship station, WTNT. On the way for us, I think we have CBS News military analyst Jeff McCausland on North Korea. That is all next here as Common Sense News Time rolls around to 7:30. We say good morning once again to Ken Johnson, who has Commonwealth headlines. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, everybody. A new poll by the University of Mary Washington Center for Leadership and Media Studies indicates Virginians are essentially split on same-sex marriage less than 7 years after an amendment to the state constitution was passed that defines marriage as being only between one man and one woman. While 46% of Virginians oppose allowing gay and lesbian couples to marry legally in the Commonwealth, 45% support the idea. In 2006, 57% of Virginians supported the ban, 43% opposed it. Regionally, same-sex marriage finds its greatest support in Northern Virginia, 59%, and the least in the western portion of the state with 31%. Among party lines, a majority of Democrats and independents supported the legal marriage, while a majority of Republicans oppose it. A Quinnipiac University poll indicates that the majority of Virginians say the names of concealed weapons holders should not be made public, 60% to 35%. The poll comes on the heels of the passage of a General Assembly bill that would prohibit court clerks from releasing such information. Among Republicans, 76% support sealing concealed carry records compared to 16% who oppose. Only 40% of Democrats thought the list should be off-limits. 55% thought it should be public record. The Navy has awarded a $2.6 billion contract to Newport News Shipbuilding to conduct the 25-year midlife refueling and overhaul of the Norfolk-based aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, including refueling the reactors, repairing and upgrading the infrastructure, and modernizing the combat and communication systems. The overhaul has been delayed about 6 weeks because Congress has failed to pass an appropriations bill in time to begin the work. The overhaul is scheduled to be completed in November 2016. Virginia State Police say about 75 vehicles crashed Sunday along a mountainous, foggy stretch of Interstate 77 near the Virginia-North Carolina border, killing 3 people and injuring more than 20 others. There was heavy fog at the time. About 24 people were taken to a shelter, with more expected to arrive. The site was set up to accommodate about 100 people. The crashes remain under investigation. Virginia Employment Commission officials say Virginia's unemployment rate was unchanged at 5.6% in February for the third straight month. The rate was down from 5.9% in February 2012. The figures have been adjusted for seasonal factors such as school closings and temporary fluctuations in industries such as tourism and construction. Virginia's jobless rate remained well below the February national rate of 7.7%, which was down from 7.9% in January. U.S. Senator Mark Warner has confirmed that he is running for re-election when his first term expires in 2014. Warner has made a name for himself nationally as a bipartisan advocate for debt reduction, and at times he is considered running for president as well as returning to his former job as governor of Virginia. However, he has discarded that idea, at least for now, because of concerns about the budget impasse in Congress. State and local news brought to you by the Chris Weaver Real Estate Team. They are your Virginia real estate leader, recognized by the Wall Street Journal as a top 100 team of all real estate teams across the entire United States. So if you want to get it done right, buying, selling, or leasing, get it done by the team that does it right. Chris Weaver, chrisweaver.com, KRISweaver.com.
With common sense for the Commonwealth, it's the John Fredericks Morning Show. Like us on Facebook. Follow John on the new Twitter handle @JF Radio Show. And online, the website, thejohnfredericksshow.com. Listen online anywhere, anytime at washingtontimes.com/listen. And make a note of the new call-in number, toll free at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646.
Cardinal Dolan says marriage is intended only for a man and a woman, and the church must do more to ensure that its defense of marriage is not reduced to an attack on gay people.
And I admit we haven't been too good at that.
But he also says the church must think of eternal concerns.
Sometimes, by nature, the church has got to be out of touch.
I think any bill that does not include a universal background check is a mistake. It's the most common sense thing that we can do to prevent criminals and the mentally ill from having access to weapons.
Each of us has to look at the language and approve it, but I don't think on the business labor side there's any disagreement. But as Senator Rubio correctly says, we have said we will not come to final agreement till we look at all of the legislative language. We've all agreed that we're not going to come to a final agreement until we see draft legislative language, and we agree on that. We've drafted some of it already. The rest of it will be drafted this week.
It's going to be different this year, especially because nobody really expected anything out of us last year, and now everybody's going to prepare a little bit more for us, and we just got to pick each other up and roll with the punches and manage the highs and lows.
I like our chances, and there's nothing better than being in the pennant race. It fires me up, and I don't mind being the defending National League East champs. I like that, and I like the fact that everybody knows we've got a good ball club here.
Now, with common sense for the Commonwealth, here's John Fredericks.
And we are here on this Monday, April the 1st. John is on his spring break. Yes, modeling Speedos down in Daytona Beach for some reason. But while we are here this week, we might as well stay with the news cycle because there's a lot going on. Steve Ray, the executive producer, along with Sean Kenny, the political editor of BearingDrift.com. And on the line, we are pleased to have from CBS News their military analyst, Jeff McCausland. Good morning and a happy Easter, Jeff.
Sean and Steve, it's great to be with you.
Absolutely. And let's kick this thing off right away by going to the Far East. Kim Jong-un, besides the fact that apparently he thought Dennis Rodman was President Obama, this is a man who is not saber-rattling in order to get winter wheat and heating oil for his people anymore, is it?
Well, then again, I'm not so sure that may be actually part of it. I think what largely is going on here is we've got a young 28-year-old leader, and you're right, if the most we know inside North Korea right now is from Dennis Rodman, we've got a real problem. But anyway, he's trying to establish his credibility with his population. He's trying to establish his credibility with a very geriatric military leadership who want to ensure they're going to be the absolute top priority in that country in any kind of resource allocation on into the future, even though a large percentage of the population is starving. And so part of that is that. Part of that is to try to get more concessions. The North Koreans, I think, believe that by doing this, they'll eventually get more concessions from the West, which could be perhaps reflected in trade. He's got a new government in South Korea that he wants to see them, be concessionary to North Korea. And finally, he'd really like to see the United States decide to recognize North Korea and conduct solely bilateral negotiations with the North, which to him would acknowledge the thing they've talked about forever, and that is that South Korea is simply a lackey of the United States, and the United States makes all decisions for South Korea, and clearly no American government's going to do that.
Jeff, what does it say to you when, following the original round of saber-rattling, let's call it that, he quite directly told the female leader of South Korea, the new leader there, to hold her tongue, and then he cut off the military hotline from the north to the south?
Well, of course, he has done all these things to ratchet up. I mean, those things he has announced that the armistice that was signed in 1953 is at least temporarily suspended, if not null and void. Talked about putting his missile forces, at a greater state of alert. And of course, he is really trying to lean on Mrs. Park, the president of South Korea, who, interestingly enough, has her own interesting history. Her father was president of South Korea, a very strong military leader, in many cases really a dictator. And her mother, of course, was assassinated by a terrorist attack led by North Korean agents. So she has some history as well that I think is important in this crisis. And as we think ahead, we've got to keep in mind that the South Koreans have accepted a couple of attacks in the past, the sinking of a ship about 3 years ago, the shelling of an island a couple of years ago. And they've made it pretty clear that if any kind of provocative military activity like that occurs, this time they will respond. They're not going to turn the other cheek as they've done in the past.
Real quick, Jeff, The Atlantic had this great article about 3 days ago. It's entitled "It's Not a Hermit Kingdom and 4 Other Myths About North Korea," where it actually started going down and started talking about the myths. North Korea's leaders are crazy. Yeah, they're a little eccentric, but they're not exactly stupid. The North Korea being a failed state, well, it's not necessarily the case. They're doing the extensive labor exchanges with the Russians and the Chinese and whatnot. It actually went through the fact that North Korea may very well have run a surplus in 2011. Talk to us a little bit about that, about what exactly is going on internally in North Korea. Is it really this hermit kingdom, or is it something that's a little bit more robust?
Well, it's pretty hermetically sealed. I mean, as one Korean expert said to me, we probably know more about black holes in the galaxy than we know about what goes on in North Korea. But, I don't think they're crazy. I mean, they certainly operate from a certain rationale which they think appropriate, and that is, of course, that no one is going to pay any attention to North Korea except for the fact that they have nuclear weapons. And they're very candid in saying, the countries that have given up their nuclear weapons programs have suffered mightily. In their propaganda, they talk about, Saddam Hussein didn't have any, and look what happened to him. They talk about the fact that Libyan leader Gaddafi gave up, his nuclear weapons program, and look what happened to him. So, as a consequence, they are very clear that they want to be recognized as a nuclear power and maintain that. As far as economic surplus and frankly, I haven't seen that. I mean, the UN actually issued a report the other day that said about half of North Korea's children may be stunted due to malnutrition, and a substantial portion of the population is still seeking, to figure out where their next meal is coming from. We also, I think, have seen in some cases some signs that their military, while very large, probably the 5th largest on the planet, still suffers from modernization. Most of their aircrafts in the 1960s, and frankly, in many of their parades, we see fewer pieces of military equipment. Some surmise it may be because a lot of it doesn't work very well.
Common Sense News Time coming up on 7:47 here on the John Frederick Show. Steve Ray, the executive producer, in today, along with BearingDrift.com's political editor Sean Kenny, as guest co-host. And we're speaking to CBS News military analyst Jeff McCausland. Jeff, first off, they showed their hand, the U.S. that is, with a pair of Eisenhower-era B-52 missions, then a couple of Reagan-era B-2s, and then some F-22s from the George W. Bush era. Did they just move a branch of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum to South Korea here? What happened? Well, why not flex the big muscle that we have, maybe an F-22?
Well, they have actually moved some F-22s into the region, and this is all part of ongoing military exercises between the United States and South Korea. They were scheduled for a long time. That being said, it's unclear whether the B-2, B-52s were part of those missions until things got a bit more tense. But clearly what we're trying to do is send a very, very clear deterrent message to North Korea that the United States maintains large-scale capabilities that can reach out and touch you at great distance. The B-2s actually were launched from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and flew a 6,500-mile round trip to drop a couple practice bombs. So there's a deterrent message being sent to North Korea. At the same time, I think there's a reassurance message that we're trying to send out to the South Koreans and also to the Japanese. In the midst of these exercises, Deputy Secretary of Defense Ash Carter visited Korea and gave a couple speeches in an effort to underscore our support for South Korea. And just the other day, there was a widely publicized phone call between Secretary of Defense Hagel and his South Korean counterpart.
Just real quick, I mean, the B-2 getting dropped in the middle of South Korea. I mean, you're talking about a piece of weaponry that's about it's $1 billion aircraft right there. It has an operative range of something on the order of like 6,800 miles. So I guess the real question is if the very fact that the United States is actually putting that in South Korea rather than, say, Alaska, Guam, areas like that. Does that sort of suggest that maybe for all the posturing, it really isn't as serious as Kim Jong-un or the North Koreans would like to portray it as?
Well, we're trying to make sure we don't overestimate North Korea, and at the same time not underestimate North Korea in this particular crisis. I think and the B-2s are not being physically positioned in the Far East. We're just demonstrate that ability to launch them and recover them back to the United States. And as you suggested a moment ago, really it's not that new a capability. I mean, when I worked in the White House during the Kosovo crisis in 1999, we actually launched B-2s from the same Air Force base in Missouri. They flew over Serbia, dropped bombs, and flew back home. So it's just that ability the United States has from the continental U.S. to reach out and make those type of missions that we're trying to underscore. And it even actually dropped a few practice bombs on island off Korea as part of this ongoing military exercise.
Jeff, let me ask you this. About 10 years ago, there was an effort by the Bush administration through back channels to actually remove a number of the North Korean scientists out to the West and hopefully collapse their nuclear program. What do we know about the back channel efforts to use what had been used in Eastern Europe by removing the wealthy, the educated, the scientists, and so forth to try and collapse the North Korean hierarchy?
Well, I'm sure that's an ongoing effort, but this, again, is a fairly hermetically sealed place. You don't see them traveling abroad in significant numbers, even as compared to what we saw in Eastern Europe. And, of course, families are maintained very closely at home while you're traveling abroad. So it doesn't seem to me that I've heard or seen, publicly at least, that we've been largely successful in that regard. That being said, it probably would be something that was kept pretty quiet. I'm sure similar activities are ongoing between South Korea in an effort, and we do see over time a number of refugees who have managed to escape North Korea and end up in the South, normally then becoming the most adamant opponents to the regime.
Jeff, let's assume that this all this Cold War talk gets hot very quickly. Could you go through us the first, say, 15 minutes of this? What exactly are we looking at here in South Korea, and what are the consequences of North Korean belligerency there?
Yeah. Well, if they actually went to a shooting war, this could be pretty terrible, and pretty terrible very quickly. The North Koreans have literally thousands of pieces of regular artillery, multiple rocket launchers, conventional multiple rocket launchers, arrayed right along the DMZ. And one needs to keep in mind that the distance from the DMZ to some parts of Seoul is about as far as from the Washington Monument to Dulles Airport. So in the first 5 minutes of the conflict, there's going to be probably a massive artillery rocket barrage that's going to strike Seoul, and we're going to see massive damage to the South Korean capital, a city of millions of people, and potentially large-scale civilian casualties. The North Korean army is about 770,000, about the fifth largest on the planet, and depending on the situation, they could make some kind of an attack and penetrate potentially in the direction of Seoul. That being said, I think U.S. air support, the South Korean military, and about 28,000 U.S. forces on the peninsula would eventually prevail without a doubt, but this could be a pretty horrific event resulting in massive casualties in the south, and of course leave North Korea and its 22 million population even more devastated than they are right now.
How likely do you think a preemptive strike on part of, whether that's South Korea, the United States, Japan working in concert, is a preemptive strike in the offing, or is the unlikelihood of that just so remote that it's probably not a possibility unless under extreme exigent circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty extreme possibility, but one you can't remove, and I think in part it's one of the reasons why the United States is being so out there in terms of flexing our military muscle, and that is to reassure the South Koreans short-term and long-term. If we were to proceed, for example, for the very few long-range systems that North Korea has tested, in many cases are liquid fuel. If we start seeing them fueling one of these things up, that might encourage someone to preempt, and obviously that could lead to a very, very severe crisis and in fact, a war. Second of all, longer term, we want to deter the South Koreans, and there has been some talk that what South Korea needs to do now is acquire its own nuclear weapon long term, and its ability to acquire its own nuclear weapon would be the ultimate deterrent to any kind of North Korean action. And obviously, in terms of proliferation, the United States thinks that would not be a good idea.
As it goes to where they get their nuclear material or who they sell it off to, that triangulation with Iran, very dangerous, obviously. I want to ask you, based on a statement made by Congressman Peter King over the weekend on one of the Sunday Talkers, he points up this 28, 29-year-old Kim Jong-un really is trying to establish himself. Is the real threat what North Korea might be boxing itself into, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's really the problem in many ways. I think you put your finger on it. I mean, once you ratchet this crisis up in an effort to make yourself feel, more powerful and perceived to be more credible, how do you then over time kind of gently ratchet this down? One of the things that experienced leaders know in a crisis is you always want to figure out some way to get myself out of this. I don't want to paint myself into a corner, nor do you want to paint your opponent into a corner. I'm sure people in the White House are talking about that as well. So he's got to figure out some way, absent a major concession, which I don't see the United States or South Korea doing, how do I slowly but surely ratchet this down, or is it just a matter of time, things kind of quietly resume back to normal? And that connection with Iran is a critical one. I mean, it was not lost on many people that when the North Koreans conducted some of their recent missile and nuclear tests, that the head of the Iranian nuclear research operations there was in Pyongyang as an observer. And there's always been concerns as well between the connection between North Korea and the efforts to develop nuclear weapons in Pakistan. So those three countries, as possible proliferators of nuclear material and missile technology, has always been a great concern.
CBS News military analyst Jeff McCausland, as always, I can't thank you enough for the time and especially for the insights, sir. Thanks again. We always appreciate you being there for us.
Steve and Sean, always a pleasure.
All right. Take care of yourself, sir. And distinguished service to his country, by the way. Jeff McCausland from CBS News. It is now 7:55. Back in a short 90 seconds with more here on The John Frederick Show.
If news media in Washington all sound the same to you, turn to the pages of the Washington Times and get a fresh take on politics, defense, national security, and more. Much more. The Washington Times brings you news and opinion on issues often ignored by the mainstream media. For home delivery, call 202-636-3333 or visit WashingtonTimes.com. The Washington Times and WashingtonTimes.com. Fearless reporting, American values.
When the Richmond insiders cut deals to raise taxes and expand government, an outsider said, hell no. Pete Snyder. Snyder helped mobilize grassroots opposition to this shameful sellout. Here's Pete Snyder.
No surprise, the career politicians and the establishment leaders in our own Republican Party took aim at me, even calling me naive for suggesting that we can cut government by a mere 10% to help solve our problems. Then they went on and passed one of the biggest tax increases coupled with a massive expansion of government that we're all going to pay for. And that is just flat out wrong.
Pete Snyder, an outsider fighting for conservative values.
The battle for the future of our party is just starting. Please join our fight.
Pete Snyder, conservative Republican for Lieutenant Governor. Learn more at PeteSnyder.com. Paid for and authorized by Pete Snyder for Lieutenant Governor.
All right, it is now 7:57 here on the John Frederick Show. Steve Ray along with Sean Kenny, the political editor of BearingDrift.com. And today, what a great show this has been so far. And it has been brought to you by the good folks at Premier Fundraising, Virginia's preeminent Republican and corporate fundraising firm. Premier Fundraising, a full-service firm managing candidates' nonprofit fundraising programs, corporate events, and they are Virginia's #1 leader in direct mail and email. Call Premier Fundraising, 703-912-6000, 703-912-6000. So, take your Cypress ATM, book your flight to Pyongyang, and have yourself a great spring break. What do you say, Sean?
the lovely beaches of North Korea. Gosh. Watch out for the mines.
Yeah, exactly. That'll put sand in places you don't want it.
No, it'll put a lot in things you don't want it.
We've had a pretty good show so far, and I can't thank you enough for being here. We've got one more hour to go, including Delegate Rob Bell, who is running for the GOP nomination for Attorney General. And then at 8:40, we'll hear from Pete Snyder, one of the Magnificent Seven, who is on board to run for the GOP nomination for Lieutenant Governor. So we've got a lot to chew on here in the next hour. Around the state, it is a nice, warm, spring-like day for the most part. Great day for opening day. If you're in the Northern Virginia, D.C. area or can get here before 1 o'clock, head to Nats Park as they take on the Miami Marlins for their opening day for the Washington Nationals. We'll be back in about 6 minutes after your top-of-the-hour news. Until then, hang with us here on The John Frederick Show. It is 7:59.